Come on now, you're Methodist, not Quakers. That means you can speak up. All
I
right.
thought it was good. I did too.
You know, well, what did you think of his analogy using the printing press?
Ouch!
I know.
You know, and all of a sudden, I had deja vu because I remember that's what we used to do to pork bellies, so you could make bacon out of it. All right, and we had to put it in a press and press it around, and then it went into a slicer and get sliced, and that's how you wind up with your pounds of sliced bacon and all of that. But I got to thinking about that. I got to thinking, he said you had to cut your hand off. Well, I got to thinking, if 5 tons fell on my hand, I think I'd just have a nub there because it would have been gone, I'm afraid, when you think about it.
Said.
But, you know, and his analogy was such that I thought it was an interesting one. And when you got to thinking about it, that first question was, what was your first job? Do you remember it? He was remembering his. Did you remember yours? Yeah. And how much did you get paid?
50 cents an hour.
50 cents an hour.
Oh yeah, I forgot about babysitting.
I got 75 cents an hour lifeguarding after I graduated from college.
You had to have a college education to get that.
Wow. That's about the way it is now.
So everybody's had an unusual one. I mean, my first one was I was raised on a farm.
Sure,
all right.
that was your first
So I had to work, and all I did was got my meals and my clothes and things like that. But I remember going, and after I got through working there, I had a neighbor that had a vegetable farm, and he sold vegetables, and so we'd go pick butter beans. All right, you call them lima beans. We call them, and they were bunch lima. They weren't poles.
Yeah.
They were bunches. You had to stoop over to buy big all that up. And we got paid $1 a bushel.
Oh my gosh, that's bad as picking peaches.
That's right.
I only picked one big bushel, and I said I don't need
That's
money.
enough.
But my first encounter with that sort of thing was we had cotton pickers. And we had people that pulled the cotton sack down the rows and picked it. And we had 2 ladies that could literally pick 1,000 pounds of cotton a day.
Oh, yeah.
And it was amazing. I mean, they would fill up their bag because I had to weigh it. My dad says, "You're going to pick cotton." And I says, "You can put the bullwhip to my backside. I am not picking cotton." He said, "Well, then that way you're going to work the scales."
How
So
old
that,
were you?
well, was it? I don't know. I was a teenager or close to being
That
one.
meant you had to move a giant bag of, oh my gosh, how much did those bags weigh?
Okay, they could have 500 pounds on
That's
it.
what I was thinking. Oh my
But-
God. Dragging it's
But
one
there were
thing,
those
picking it up
those
like
ladies
that.
were amazing. They would go along, and that cotton would run down their fingers, and they'd have their elbow in their bag, and that cotton would be running by them and going into their bag as it went right down. It was amazing.
That's amazing.
But we paid them so much a pound for the cotton picking. And
Well, that was really our first job.
Yeah.
We only got a nickel for a toe sack.
a nickel a toe
For a
sack.
toe sack.
You realize how long those sacks were as long as this 8-foot
Yeah.
table,
No, I'm talking about
and
a toe sack.
they were tarred on the bottom. You remember that?
No, I don't, I've never
So
seen
that
them.
they
I've
were
only
they
watched
were
them.
tarred on the bottom so that because they were dragging them down the rows and they wouldn't wear out. The,
Yeah, they
I wondered how they didn't wear out.
yeah, they had tar on the bottom. Had a
Makes
tar
sense.
coating on, so. We had, that was it. But everybody's had some unusual ones, jobs, and and how you got.
I cleaned out the cabins on Cattle River down by the low water bridge. People would move
Yeah.
out, and I'd have to go in and change the sheets, make up the beds, and sweep.
But then
Clean
you
up
were
any
on the
dishes.
Caddo River. That's
Well, it was a mile from my house. I
Oh,
walked
that's
it,
even
rode my
better.
bicycle.
Yeah. Well, anyway, when you think about it, and you're looking at this, and I got to thinking about what we're looking at, because we're looking at the 32nd, the 33rd, and 34th chapter of the book of Deuteronomy, and we're getting to the end of it and what's going on. And what you find out in there is in the 32nd chapter, they actually tell you early about Moses, all right? And he makes comments here. But it was the final encouragement that Moses had, and I was amazed at all of this, that God may not have been gentle, but he provided a clean and effort cut for Moses to leave. Have you ever left a job?
Yeah.
Have you ever been asked to leave a job?
Yeah.
And what you got to realize, and have you ever left and said, take this job and sing Johnny Paycheck's song and shove it, all right? But we've all been at some point. But here was Moses, all right? He had been putting up with these Israelites for 40 years. Was he married?
Nobody knows.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he,
Well,
Moses was married earlier.
he had 2 daughters, or 2 kids, all right? Yeah, and
He had a wife somewhere.
he had one wife, and they're keeping thinking about. They wasn't sure the other one was his wife, but that was another issue. That was before he started his episode with the Israelites.
Yeah.
But you got to realize he was one of the great prophets of the Israelites. Okay, and he's the only one that spoke to God face to face. And this is, you got to realize what he held to the Israelites. They had to look at him and understand what he was. Because you remember after he came down off the mountain one time, he had to put a cloth over his head because his face had gotten so red from the glory of God around him. But he said God spoke to him that very same day. And all of a sudden I'm looking, as I read this, and I'm saying, do you realize what you're recording, Moses? Because you wrote this. Or maybe Joshua is now writing this part of it. I'm not sure. But he said, the Lord spoke to Moses on the very same day, saying, go up to the mountain of Abarim, which is Mount Nebo, which is in the land of Moab. Now, you realize where that is. That's across the Jordan. All right. Moab is just north of where, you remember the 2 brothers, the twins, Jacob and Esau? All right. Then they split and go. The Edomites, which is south of Moab, were the descendants of Jacob's brother Esau, all right? So you have that in your picture, in your mind. But here he is, he's done this, and he told him to go in this land of Moab. In other words, you're up there, you climb the mountain. He's 120 years old. But the Bible tells us he still had his good sight. And I give thanks, I just say, oh, thank goodness for glasses, Lord. And he literally had energy. The Bible said he had plenty of vigor about him, okay? But he said, in which the land of Moab, opposite Jericho, all right? So you can look in your map. I don't have one in here. I think I took them over the other place. And you got Jericho there across the river from to the west of Moab, all right? And so he was climbing up there. And you look at the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the sons of Israel for possession, and then die on the mountain where you ascend. The thing about it is he did die there. And nobody knows where Moses was buried. And I think Mark makes some comments in his book about that scenario, which is really and truly sort of a harsh command, as you think about it. Yes.
Okay, who was the other one? It said Beth. What is it? Bethpeor.
Yeah, I didn't understand that
Who
either.
was there? I mean, who was he?
Who?
It's in here.
Beth. That's right.
I don't know where you.
What
They
is it?
said he was buried. With him or something.
God buried
No.
Moses in the valley of the land of Moab, opposite Beth-Peor.
Yeah.
Well,
That's
maybe
opposite.
that is.
That's
no,
opposite.
person.
That's not by somebody else. That's opposite of that position.
It's not a
in the
But
Okay.
no man knows his burial. Actually, that was kind of surprising to me.
But he goes on and tells you why.
Yeah.
Because if you go read the writers on the book of Deuteronomy, they did not want a place that the Israelites could go back and make an honor. They wanted to move on, be done with it. And so,
Shut the door.
This is what they say is Mount Nebo. So
Yes.
that's not quite as difficult as you might think.
well,
about
but you look down the valley over the next.
Yeah, I know. It's way
If
up
I'm
there.
120 years old, I don't know about you, but I'd have trouble getting up those steps going up from the breezeway up there.
Yes.
That's why we have those little electric chairs for some of us that we can get up those steps.
I was thinking like an old jagged rock
Yeah.
Well, it-
thing that he
Yeah,
had.
and it may well
to
be.
Like the bad side of Pinnacle.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bad
They
side
didn't
of,
have any handrails.
Right, no.
you know, you can go up Pinnacle on the west
Like I
side
do.
and it's not too bad, but you try to go up to it from the east side and it's pretty tough, you know. But we have a friend that he enjoyed doing that. But it was here you can imagine what he's gone through for 40 years, all right, and put up with it. And my opinion is, how in the world was he able to think about not being angry?
How was he not angry?
How did Moses not, with all the griping, with all the complaining
Yeah.
and everything, think about it.
But he never did really. I mean, he knew what God had in store.
Because he's talking face to face to God, yes.
Well, and at this point, I think he was beyond being angry.
He was
got in
tired.
trouble one time for.
Yes, he did.
Well, you got to realize God told him there in the
He
32nd
knew.
chapter that, hey, you're not getting in there, all right?
You were bad.
Well, now we think we know what he did, but we really don't know what he
He
did.
was probably thinking, what
We
really?
think that it was because he
really
angrily struck the rock twice, which God told him not to do, and he did it. But if you read the scriptures, there's implications that there might have been other ramifications on that as well. So when you look at it and think about it, what did you think about him talking about his family after his grandmother died? As long as they were cleaning out and found the dust, and all of a sudden they found under the mattress what?
With boxes.
Money.
Boxes with money in it. So then you can imagine. Have you ever been in a family where the estate and the will is being read? I was just reading a book about that, and the father didn't want one of his children to get the house, so he had an issue called tontine, Tontine, which is a way of making an inheritance to you. You get the house, and the other sibling can't get the house till you die. That's so it's legal, all
Yes,
right?
it is. As long as they're paying.
But so when you look at this and think about it, I'm thinking of his family. They're all upset, saying, Grandma, how much money did she hide if she got this little bit here? Where's all the rest of it? Have you not seen that?
Yeah.
Have you not read where people,
That's
when
madman.
they got in the house and cleaned them out, they found out under the bed, under their mattress, or between the mattress and box springs, they had bukus of money.
A friend of mine's grandmother-in-law put it in books, and she had shelves
Oh
of
my
books.
gosh, it's a
And
wonder
they were
found
starting to clean because they didn't want all these books, and they were going to donate them. They started pulling books off, and the first book they pulled off was the Bible. And they looked at it and said, "We ought to keep this," and opened it up, and there was like $230, $400 in the Bible, and it would be ones, fives, tens, nothing bigger than a 20.
There's
it.
Everywhere.
That was her finding.
when my dad was pastoring a church in Lothies many years ago,
But I mean,
and this goes back to when I was in high school, there was an older pair of sisters, older ladies, and one of them passed on. They lived like paupers. And they thought nothing of it until the lawyer contacted the congregation and said, "You need to have a representative at the reading of the will." First reaction was, "Wait, what?" They went to the will, and the second reaction was, "Oh my,
Yeah.
$75,000 in a bank account that she never talked about." And that was one of like a dozen like that.
Well, some years ago when the banks were looking, you remember when the banks were putting out in the paper saying, we have this, here.
Oh, I don't think that's.
That'll do it. Just take it. Come on.
We'll just.
What is that?
Call my coffee flipped over.
But anyway,
All by itself.
when they
I
were
didn't
looking
get
for
it.
it, identifying we have these accounts, who are they? They found out one of the street people had $15,000
Yes.
in an account.
Oh my God.
But I don't know if y'all remember, but the Gazette used to print those every, when they were trying to find them. So that was but that happens, and people hoard money back, and they, this sort of thing. And I'm sure that's what they were trying to look for. And all of a sudden, families start growling at each other. I loved what he said. They were sequestering behind closed doors and talking to themselves. I thought that was an interesting thing about that. But,
if you have $1 and two relatives,
That is right.
Yeah.
And that is true.
But I'd never heard of this tontine type of inheritance. But they did it. It was all underhanded because the attorney wanted the property,
Of course.
and so that was another thing there in the book I was
Usually
reading.
is.
But anyway, you think about it and all. But here we're in the midst of passing the baton. And how many of you did relay racing?
No.
In the water.
In the water, okay. And you can't move, you can't jump in till your partner touches the wall.
Yeah.
But then the same thing is with passing the baton when you're running races. And I've actually seen that dropped, all right?
Oh, yeah.
And so that was, as a matter of fact, I remember a young guy that he dropped it, he picked it up, and I have never seen the afterburners turn in like he did. I mean, he literally ate up and come in, I mean, placed, you know. I don't know if it was second or third, but he got there, and it was interesting how he came out of there because he was determined they're not going to get on me and chew me out for losing this race.
Have y'all seen the Indian relays where they ride bareback on horses?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, I have actually, just on TV.
I can't imagine. I mean, I gotta have steroids.
Be like me. I gave, when my husband died, I gave all my important stuff away to
Important
each grandchild. Well, like my 4-wheelers, my guns,
Oh,
and all
okay.
that.
All right.
Everything I had, I gave away. So there wouldn't be no fussing who was getting who.
Good.
All I got is my house, and my sister and my son can live there till they die, and then I'll give it to one grandchild.
Well, what
Well-
if you die first? She asked me to come. What if you die first?
Well, it was
That's what I said. If I die,
Oh,
my
they
sister
can live
and my
there.
son gets to stay there
No,
till
you
they
die, I'm back
die,
to Florida.
and then I'm giving it.
You actually can fill out a form down.
Well, anyway, Moses, in leaving, he left them singing. He gave them, you look at the 23rd chapter, it is Moses' song. And the Bible says he just started saying all of this. And I know it's quite long. I don't know if you look at the 33rd chapter, it is a long song that he gave there. And I thought that was interesting with that. But here he was. He left them. He gives them a blessing and singing. He tells them about all the love for God and appreciate what God has done for the nation, what he's done and taken them from that. And so we got to thinking today, when you look at it, a lot of times, I wanted to ask you a question. How many of you, a while ago he was talking about his grandmother's funeral, how many of you have ever had a difficult funeral you've ever attended?
Oh, yeah.
Difficult. My mother,
My mom and my dad. For me.
mostly my mother, my husband.
Oh, yeah.
Well, those, those kind of things. Now, I've had difficult ones because I've had families that would not talk to each other.
Oh, yes.
Oh, I hate
I had one funeral, and the individual had died. He had a family, and his wife had a family, and they didn't have a family together, but they were, And when we were at the cemetery, and I'm in Jacksonville Cemetery, okay, and his family's over here, and her family's over here, and they weren't going to meet where I have him burying him, there right at the graveside. And I literally had to say, either you get here and you meet, or you're not going to, I'm going to turn around and walk off. And they all said, oh, so then I made them get together. I said, look, this is the ending. You should, you're not honoring our good friend here that we're getting ready to put in the ground. I said, this is not fair to him, And so it was that. But, I've had those kind of things where I even had somebody get up and say how bad their grandmother was in the cemetery. As a matter of fact, the funeral director and I both looked at each other. We thought, what's going on here? Because he used words about grandma that you wouldn't believe. And when he was doing it, everybody, the family were saying amens. And I'm thinking, I didn't know the lady. I knew the family, but I didn't know the lady. And
That's
so
not really necessary.
when it got ready, it was a graveside.
Okay, I'm gonna confess this. My grandmother was the worst person I ever knew in my entire life. She hated me. She hated my mom worse than anything.
It's confessional time, folks.
She called that Japanese bee, okay,
Right.
that her baby boy brought home and all this kind of stuff. And at her funeral, people got up and started talking about what a wonderful woman she was, and I started mumbling under my breath, and my husband had to take me out of the church before
He got taken out of church.
because I was going, they should have lived with her.
Well, and we've seen those guys, so that's a difficult one when you realize what you're having to go through.
She
Because
was awful.
I have to be careful when I'm doing a funeral. There's some that I have really gone in prayer, saying, Lord, help me say this correctly.
She lied on me once and told Daddy I spit in her face, and my daddy, listen, if it had been today, Daddy would have gone to jail for what he did.
Well, I had a scenario in our family like that. It was my stepfather's mother. And
I'm just getting all
she,
mad thinking about it.
but you see,
She's gone.
but you see, it really in truth. But I've had weddings be as bad.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
You know, I've had weddings where the bride and her mother just were almost in fisticuffs.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, because her mother didn't wear the dress she wanted her to wear.
Oh goodness.
Oh, that's
Tell
something.
you, it's a shame you can't get along with everybody.
And so you see, there's all sorts of conflicts in families. There's all sorts of conflicts. It could be a wedding, it could be a funeral, it could be a graduation, it could be a lot of things when you think about it.
Trip.
Yeah, a shopping trip. Yes, that's another one. Those are things that are so you know. But why do you believe that kept Moses from feeling sorry for himself?
I think he knew
Well,
what
he knew he was going to the Lord for
Yes,
one
he had
His
thing.
relationship.
Yeah.
with
I
God.
mean, you know, he had faith.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's done what.
In other
God
words, he didn't take a parting shot. He didn't get
Wasn't
Have you
thrown
ever?
at him at the last minute, you know.
Yeah. Have you ever had anybody make a parting shot to you?
Oh,
I'm sure I have.
Yeah. Hard.
Have you ever been the recipient of that?
He's talking to you.
Are you talking about like at the end you say something?
No, it's just anything. It's sort of like when you've done something or you help somebody, and all of a sudden you're trying to keep a situation going on calm, and then all of a sudden there's a parting shot made by somebody like, well, yeah, you say that, but let me say something.
Like the coach says, you're not going to start on this game, you're going to be on the bench.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. There can be that sort
I
of thing.
have to admit something in here.
Oh.
And I know I'm
Confession day.
being recorded. Parting shot to me is, yay, Judy. That's all I want to admit, because they do that in Irish.
Yeah, they do. They do that in Irish pubs. Yeah.
I think I'd rather have that than some of the other stuff.
Well, he had a scenario with his mother-in-law similar to what we've been talking about here. She did not lash out, he thought, but it was a classic statement. You have to love in your heart. Have to have love in your heart, and that's an interesting thing about it. That's where Moses was. Moses had love for God in his heart, and he realized God was being critical and also pretty harsh. All right, to say, you've done all this, but your reward is you're going to die on the mountain and nobody's going to know where you're buried.
Well, he didn't want it to become more important than what God had done
That
for
is
him.
right.
I mean,
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
To go forward. Yeah.
But the thing about it is, he went willingly.
Yeah,
Well, he didn't want him to have a choice of leaders.
no.
If Moses was still around, there were going to be some that would want
Always go back
Yeah.
to him. Now, that's
Well, that's sort of like you and I have
Moses
seen
thinks.
churches.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, one's not too far from us, where the senior pastor had been there for years, retired, and kept an office in the church
Oh, yeah.
when the new pastor came in.
Oh.
And he was listed as pastor emeritus.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like a friend of mine was pastor at First Church, Fort Smith, many years ago. He followed Dr. Roebuck.
Oh, my.
Dr. Roebuck
Oh,
lived to be 100 and something years old. He started out as a circuit rider around Stuttgart. All right, and he was known throughout Arkansas Methodism. I mean, he'd done marvelous things, But my friend Joe and our friend was pastor there, and I said, "Joel, how you doing with this?" He says, "Dr. Roebuck still walks the halls."
Dr. Robot would have done this.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
Well, and that happened, if you all remember, it happened to Emmanuel Baptist when W.O. Vault retired, but he stayed in office there for a while, and I had to admire the pastors that came and how they were able to handle it, because all of a sudden people accept the new pastor, but they don't give up on the old one.
Right.
So that's why people, when Joy and I left and came here, they were calling me back to do funerals at Concord. And I said, I would call their pastor. And I said, look, I told him, I said, you go to your pastor. If your pastor wants me to come, you have your pastor call me. I am not getting in the midst of all of this.
Right.
And I have actually told in a couple of them, I can't do it. I will not come in there and do it. I will come to the funeral, but I will not be the leader of the service.
But Moses had seen God's face. Moses
Yeah.
had a very close relationship with God.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm sitting around trying to figure out if I'm actually hearing God or my own
We've
conscience.
been, we've been
Well, we've been discussing it. Yeah.
Well, and that's
he
true.
knew God. I
Yes.
mean, he knew God better than anybody except Jesus.
But
I
we
mean,
wonder what happened with Moses. We know he died, right? We don't know where he was buried. Who
buried
who
God
How
buried
did they
him.
know he was buried if he was?
well, the
Well,
Lord
nobody
said,
knows.
you know, that
It was divine intervention.
you know, that's I don't know beyond that, but we do know what happened on the Mount of Transfiguration. When Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him up on the mountain, who did they see? Christ talking to Moses and Elijah. So we do know, according to Scripture, the New Testament, that's where he got to go, even though he was buried and they don't know where he's buried. It's not important, really. That's why we find people today. Joy and I are in England, and they got to the point that everybody had to be cremated because there was no more property available, unless you already owned your property
The
for it.
government owned all
And
that.
we had a columbary right there on the campus of the church. Matter of fact, there were a lot of graves there because when they had the cholera epidemic there back in the late 1800s, families were buried together. They had families that all died. So that's where it was. But you realize where he's coming from and what he's done. And yeah, he's the only prophet that we know of that saw God face to face. And the only reason we know that is he writes about it. He's the one that's written the first 5 books of the Old Testament, which the Jews call the Torah, or the Septuagint, whatever you want to call it in the different Greeks and so forth. But we have that.
I thought it was interesting in 31, the Lord tells him though, and he didn't get discouraged, that the people's going to turn against him,
Yeah.
break his covenants,
Yeah.
and everything else when he went over in the promised land.
Yeah.
But evidently, of course, by that time, I thought that was interesting because he knew what the people were going to do when they got over there.
But that's the reason he was
He was
repeating.
prepared.
That's the reason he
They've
was
been
giving
doing
them.
that all along.
Yeah. They knew this was going to transpire, but God knew what was going to
I
happen.
know that's
All
what
right.
I'm saying. And
But he
told
was also
Moses
having
it was
Moses
gonna happen.
give them the 10 Commandments again. All right. They need to have this in their mind, and they need to have it. And I don't think the first intention in my thoughts, this is me speaking. I don't think that was the intentions when they went in. All right. And it's like you and me going to a new town. All right. And getting in, next thing you know, you're invited to go somewhere. And all of a sudden you're in a situation where you are not, I don't think I wanted to be here, but I'm here.
Well, something that has come to my understanding after doing this is the size of the group.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah.
I just
million.
never had conceived of there being that many people.
1 million.
Yeah.
I mean, how in the
And
world?
were they
did
just
you
talking
keep
men then, like they do?
Yeah,
in
that
every
really
place
is.
else?
That
It was
wasn't
women giving
or
birth to
children.
babies,
Oh,
people
yeah,
dying.
I mean, they only counted the men.
And they had all that going on.
Loaves, that was only men.
Oh,
Do
you
what?
think they only counted the men?
I think
That's
maybe they had more, 2 million.
Because
The men were the only ones counting. Remember when Christ had fed the 5,000? Well, that was 5,000 men.
I don't
They didn't have the rest of the families.
Really? I
be
never knew
surprised.
that.
Oh, yeah.
I never even thought about that.
Yeah.
Wow, learn something new every day.
So when you realize,
I
I don't know about you, but when you get beyond 1 million, I don't care if it's 2
Well,
million.
you can't imagine. I
No.
mean, most people cannot actually imagine 1 million things.
No,
No,
no.
I can't.
Well, it's
Not even
like
really small.
it's
Well, I
like
mean, it's just a mass out there. You
Well-
might be able to imagine a mass, but everybody knows that's 5. You can see that. You can imagine 5, but 1 million? Your
That's
brain won't
people
do it.
everywhere.
Yeah.
well,
And
it's
it's
sort of like
only the men.
yeah.
And the people at the back are saying, did the front go yet?
Oh, well, yeah. And what did he say? I said,
And
especially me.
10,000 a year, 100,000 a year, there pretty soon you're talking some serious numbers.
That's right.
when you realize this, and think about that, that was the way the numbers were done. You know, they
Yeah.
counted.
I really didn't. I never thought about that they were on. Am I the only one?
No,
I
I
never
just
thought
never had
about
really
the fact
thought
that
much
they
of
were.
Well, see, that
on.
even makes the miracle even greater.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It really
And they had
does.
12 baskets left over.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah.
talking
Well,
about the
and
New Testament
another
now,
way to
but-
look at it too, that there were that many people in slavery
Yeah.
that they were releasing.
In Egypt, yeah.
Well, but you got to realize that had gone on for 400 years.
Yeah,
And that's quite a few generations.
Yeah.
So the million that he was leading had no concept of what was like when they went into slavery into Egypt. In other words, so
I knew men were always the only ones counted, but I just never thought about it being in the Bible.
In the Bible.
Well,
It just didn't occur to me.
well, also too, some of them went with them that wasn't Jew. Remember, they
Well-
were the aliens. They called them.
yeah,
Yeah, they went with them.
yeah. They
See,
were,
I knew
If they could get in the group.
Yeah.
well, it's sort of like
I think there is too.
we think about Jesus traveling with his 12 disciples, right? Well, have you seen an evangelist traveling in the United States?
Oh my gosh.
The entourage that's with him.
Buses and buses.
I was on a plane one day and a young man got in and sat down by me and was flying something. I think I was coming out of the West Coast. And I said, we got to talking. He was a forerunner for the Billy Graham
Oh.
crusade that was going to go on.
Yeah.
And he had to be there ahead. It's sort of like our son, when he worked for the Atlanta Falcons, he was the front person. He had to go in and make sure everything come up. And then all of a sudden, here's this mass of people that come in to make sure it works. And that's what happens. And that's what was going on here. You realize that they were there. But it's like when you think about Jesus and the 12 disciples, and people keep saying, well, where are the women in? I said, well, they were there. If you don't believe it, go back and read Paul. And you find Lydia and you find Priscilla and all these. What were they doing there? Well, they were making sure the meals were served,
Taking
making
care
sure
of
that everything was being done. And what's going on in the church today?
Here we are.
What would the church be like today if we didn't have the ladies doing all the things that they're
Well, it'd
doing?
be Mark.
And so when you realize what I keep telling everybody, look, it's like when I wrote the other day or said something Sunday about the fact being is God's the Spirit, and that's why I think we're mature enough to say we can call God Mother if we want, because He said, "I'm going to treat you like a mother treats." She's not going to keep sucking a child, nursing a child. And so when you realize that and you realize what's there, we get stronger in our faith. We realize that, hey, I can remember when churches would not accept women as preachers.
Yes.
Oh,
It wasn't that long ago.
Some churches still are.
That's right. And some of them still won't. The denomination says no. All right. We had an interesting scenario when I was lay member at annual conference and also lay leader at Old Winfield downtown. We had a sweet lady. She taught us Sunday school class. She taught school. She was this sweet person you want to know. And I was having lay Sunday, all right? And I went to her and asked her, I said, would you read the scripture? And she says, no, I will not get in the pulpit. I said, what? And she said, that's not a woman's place.
Oh.
And I'm back. I said, you teach Sunday school? And she said, that's another story.
Oh, it is, huh?
And I thought, wow. But Joy knows her, and she was this sweet
And
old lady.
those men knew what she wanted done.
Yeah, she really
She
did.
didn't have to get in the pulpit.
Yeah, and her husband was vice president of one of the big banks here in town, and so she could get everything. And she would tell about how they would go when they used to use Central High's auditorium for any special thing coming, and the people would come into things with tux and gowns and everything, and she would tell about that. But I said, "But you wouldn't do, you'd be involved in all that." She said, "I said." You won't get in the pulpit. She says, it's not a lady's place. And I said, okay.
Okay.
But she was a super person. But anyway, back to what we're talking about here. On the thing about it is that, entire transition took months. All right. It didn't happen just overnight. As we read what was transpiring here, he's right. There had to be, they had to think about where they were. At one point, I sort of laugh about all this. You're talking about what goes on in funerals, and I've seen a lot. I did a funeral right here, from here, and we had to go over to the Forest Hills and hold the burial, and we had a Masonic closing and a military closing, and a tornado was coming in on top of it.
Oh my gosh.
And it was raining so hard we couldn't even hear them play the taps. And it was coming down so hard like that. So you can see what they were going through, and you have all sorts of things in that. But when you look at Deuteronomy 34, 5 and 6, we hear Moses and where he is and what he's about. And granted, his funeral was not a model plan for everybody. No one in the generation rest had an opportunity to do any kind of idol worship. God wanted to make sure that you didn't know where Moses was, because Moses was the only prophet that had seen God face to face. And imagine what he meant to them.
Yeah.
He could truthfully say, God said this, right? I mean, it's not like maybe I heard God say, he said God said this. And so those things are there. And so when you look at this and realize that God did not want, and he doesn't want us to have any kind of idol worship in our life as well. It's like he's talked about. How many of you read about the Shroud of Turin?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter to me. That doesn't have to prove to me that, and I'm sort of like Mark here, that doesn't necessarily have to have me to understand that, to believe that Christ was buried and rose again. I don't need that, all right? But some people might. But it's interesting. It's interesting to look at. It's interesting to see the image that's in the shroud and sort of things. That's a lot of great things there. But by the same token, I get excited when I see them do digs from what happened in Italy when they had the earthquake and the volcanoes and covered everything up, and they're digging things out, and they found people still in sitting positions and things like that. That's interesting, but the shroud to me doesn't change my
Is
feeling.
respect? I mean, I would respect the shroud.
Oh, I would respect it, yeah.
But that's not idol worship, is it?
No.
I would never desecrate it. I would never. Well, I wouldn't desecrate this church or anything like that.
I would respect it only as an object of curiosity.
Yeah.
Well, it's also something of history,
It's
all right?
history.
And
Presumably,
I'm not sure.
I don't mean to argue with it, but notice, we're never going to find the Holy Grail. The Ark of the Covenant has gone missing, and everything that went with it. Everything that was, or is, or could be closely associated with God and Jesus cannot be found.
sort of like
Our
Moses.
Bible.
Like Moses, yes, exactly.
In the ark.
That is my argument that says that it is a scientific curiosity, not.
Well, somebody said the ark. That's the same thing. We have the curiosity
Noah's
about.
ark.
Yeah.
Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, the ark. I'm talking about the ark that Noah.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah.
So I always laugh and think about it. Did you think he had to carry a pair of termites with him?
Yeah, good to joke about that.
That's why they can't find it.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's why they can't find it.
You did that. I didn't go there.
That was a joke, Candy.
But
Because,
there's a lot of. I love. And it's like I got a text yesterday from a friend. Some of you may know her. She was at one time Debbie. Roby. And she's now with him. She and Rich, her husband, are taking their granddaughter, who wants to go into paleontology,
Oh boy.
and they're taking her to Utah to do some digging here shortly, and that's where I am about the shroud. I enjoy digging and finding out something like that, but it doesn't change what I'm about. It's sort of like we have trouble thinking about whether Christ died and went to hell. We don't, it does say that in some of that's the way the Apostles' Creed was originally written. All right, he died and was buried, descended into hell, and the third day he rose. We put it as a little asterisk we did in the Methodist hymnal. All right, but the fact being is, I sort of think he may have. Because I think some years ago I preached on a sermon of him kicking open the gates of hell, and you got to realize there were people there that were faithful to God, but had never known Christ. And if you read it, he says he takes the saints with him. How do you do it? Think about that. So we're thinking that. The way Moses handled his transition, though, I think was absolutely superb. And it's sort of like he says at the very last sentence of his article closing here. He says the book of Deuteronomy gave generation rest, the reckless abandon it needed in order to take the land that God had given them. Can you imagine? You got to realize they looked across that river and they said, have you ever had God give you something and you're not sure that if you thought God gave it to you?
Yeah, my younger son.
Remember, we're recording.
Don't let your son hear this.
Well, I think everything we get is from God.
Well, yeah, I do too.
Well, I agree with you there, but there are a lot of folks that it's like the song that Frank Sinatra sang, "I did it my way,"
Yeah.
and that's true. You may do it your way, but who gave you the ability to do that?
God.
Yeah. See, that's where we get into arguments and debates about it all. When we look and think about it, is time. The transition that we have in our lives. That's where we are. We've got you as a congregation have gone through a transition within the last year. All right, you've seen that. All right, our friends in Nashville are going through a transition in their times. Think of the transition that the generation rest was really going into, because they couldn't imagine. There is no way that I would think they had any idea about what they were getting ready to walk into, other than what Moses had told them.
If you think about a desert versus nice green lush ground, I mean,
Right.
that is night and day.
Everybody that was going into the new land didn't have any past of being sheep herders or farmers or vineyard keepers.
Yeah.
Nobody, everybody was gone, and
That did that.
how'd they learn?
Trial and error.
Well,
Well, it was.
I think it was so. I think there were people that God had already given the ability to say. For instance, he chose Joshua. All right, and Joshua had a lot of talents for leading and doing things. There's some people that you and I know that can do almost anything with their hands. All right, and they can do that. There are other people we know that really know how, without going to school or anything, know how to handle a crowd or anything like that. So
And you wonder about those savants,
yeah,
because those are people that they almost have no knowledge whatsoever. They're almost, well, the old word was retarded. We don't use that anymore. But they have this gift. And, a 1-year-old can sit down at the piano and play. Or I saw one on TV that he carved. He deeply carved, and he couldn't do anything, lived in a nursing home, but he carved animals to the nth degree of their bodies. And, that's kind of a savant thing. Now, where does that come from?
all we know is that it worked. Okay.
We were at a family get together, and one of the family members showed us a picture that a young man, 10 years old, that he had befriended and really gotten close to, that this boy drew this picture. And it's a picture of Christ, like he's not on the cross, but the body and the muscle structure. I mean, it looks like it's going to leap out at you. He's 10.
And he had never seen them. This is what I was talking about. Had never seen these animals.
This came from inside,
that he carved out. They'd never seen any. He hadn't been anywhere to see a giraffe or a buffalo or something.
I thought the same thing. I would not have
like
known
that.
myself
Yeah.
how that would have looked, but
And
he's got a gift.
Yes, that is a gift.
It's a
Rain
gift.
Man counting those matches. Yeah. Oh, there's a 750.
I think everyone has some kind of gift.
Some kind of talent, and you just got to find it and use it.
Well, I always thought God didn't give me no talent, but of any kind. But I think because I lived for my family,
Yeah.
and I take care of them. And
Yes.
That's a good.
all through
That's
their
a
generations. I want my third generation.
Yes.
Great grandchildren.
And the reward for that is the peace you feel.
Yeah.
Well, we think about it. It's what I wrote about the other day. We had 4 generations together. And you realize what gets passed down through all this. They come back and say, Mimi, how did you make this? It's sort of like the joke, you've heard it before, where the couple was getting ready to have everybody there, and they were going to cook a ham. And he took and cut the end off the ham and put it in the pot.
Yeah.
And she said, what did you do that for? She said, well, that's the way my mother did it. He said, really? So he went and asked his mother-in-law. She said, all the reason I cut that end off of it, I didn't have a pot big enough for it to go in. So, but these sort of things happen to us,
Yes.
you know, and you realize, and this is what happened with the generation rest. They absorbed a lot that they didn't realize at that moment that they had absorbed it.
Well, and they learned survival things. They didn't have the store to go to and get stuff. You know, they learned how to make do.
But, you know, I remember being raised on the farm, okay? And there were certain things that you wind up seeing occur that you wind up doing, you know, and you all of a sudden say, well, okay, that's not as hard as I thought it might be. Yeah. And so we would be the curse today I learned to milk a cow, though, but that's another story.
When they came into the promised land, there were people there. They were
Yes.
farming. And they
9 nations were there.
9 nations
Nine
were there.
nations.
They didn't kill every single body.
They were supposed to.
We don't know.
Oh, you don't know? Well, I was assuming that they might have killed the leaders. And then you got all the... And they
Well, I think there was
enslaved
assimilations of it all.
everybody. Yeah, and
I
they
think there was.
assimilated.
That
And
got
then
But
those
what-
were the
what
people
God
that
said,
knew how to
though-
live in that land.
In other words,
Somebody had to teach them.
you had to take that, and God gave them the power to whip all of them, all right? But what happens to us, all right? In our lifetime, we've seen Japan survive. Why?
And surpass.
That's right, all right? And we saw the same thing happen with Germany, all right? These at one time were enemies, all right? And what did they become?
Well,
And so we
I
see.
became a teacher.
That's right. And so what I'm saying is,
Good girl.
do you think we did that? Where do you think the mentality came from for us to do that for our enemies?
Oh,
Now I don't know that a lot of people don't want to get church and state involved. But you got to realize our basis is the fact that God says, love your neighbor as yourself. And that's even if your enemy, you make him a friend. The best thing you can do for an enemy is make him your friend. And that's what we did. And then what happened? Both nations went boom. All right. And so when you see that kind of thing occur, it didn't only happen there, it's happened elsewhere where we've done some things like that. But, and that to me comes back and says the same thing that happened to the Israelites. You're going in, you're going to take over this area. I'm giving you the power, I'm giving you the facilities for doing it, but realize something. You're still my children, and you must act as I want you to act. But they didn't. They started worshiping little gods and that sort of stuff. But that's the reason they had some more time going on. But that was the beginning, and they literally had the power and the energy and the esprit de corps to get it done, and that's what's happened. And they can thank Moses for that.
So didn't they also, they had cattle, cows, sheep too, but they took with them, didn't they? Because they had to have something for offerings. Didn't they say that? With them?
I don't know if they ran 3 or something.
If you remember when they left out,
Didn't take any?
they only left with the clothes they had on their
Okay.
back, and they were hauling
Oh,
them
okay.
down to get across because
Yeah.
Pharaoh's army was coming
Okay,
behind
well,
them,
maybe
so
not.
you couldn't have gotten cattle. But in my mind, there's a lot of places to get. I think there was enough animals in the wilderness for them to have hunters to kill them and have food. All right, but they didn't do that. They all got hungry, so God had to do what?
Yeah.
Feed 'em.
Right.
Give them manna.
Well, you had- Can you imagine
The amount of
millions of
manna.
people? But no, just millions of people. It would be like locusts. I mean, there wouldn't be anything after
Well,
that.
you remember
Be walking
remember the
shoulder
quail
to
that came
shoulder.
in?
Yeah.
Where did the quail come from? And all of a sudden they knew, hey, we can slaughter the quail and That's good eating. I don't know what you get. Quail is very good.
Well, if you're hungry, it would be.
It would be.
It's good if you're not on that.
That's right. But that's where it is. I hope you've enjoyed this. We're going to take a break on this Bible studies. I got John Verdi going to coming in, and so he's going to try to come back and do a study for us. It's probably going to be July with him, and I don't know what we'll pick up between here and there. So, but we do know that he's going to come and do one. So we'll see from there.
So how you gonna let us know what we're doing?
You know,
Well, you're as close as seeing you on Sundays, all right, or reading my emails or something.
we're almost like Moses, like God had him do that. Our generations, we tried to get our families to be good, to be honest, to go by God and all that from generation to generation.
But the Bible is your guide.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of things there. But yeah, we will be getting my emails and I'll work it all together and see where we go. I don't know whether you noticed or not, but we've had an interesting occurrence in the last, from April the 8th through to in this coming Sunday, it's Pentecost. You've had a total eclipse.
Yeah.
You've had the northern lights as far south as it. And now you got Pentecost coming up this Sunday, all right? Now, there are people, we're still on? Are you off?
I would be glad to close
Okay.
it.
There